Near-death experience. There are folks among us who have actually experienced death, who have been dead, so to speak, who have gotten a glimpse of the other world, the world of spirit, the world of soul. Some of these folks have amazing, almost miraculous stories. They were either proclaimed dead by doctors, they were either in, life-threatening comas. They were probably experiencing some sort of an accident or epiphany that temporarily sort of defied all sorts of physics and the laws of reality. But there are many folks like this, right? And thanks to social media, thanks to just things becoming more actually accessible to us, we're able to hear many of their stories and experience indirectly the things that they were experiencing. Get to gain a window into that moment where your body may have shut down, or that moment where everything seemed to stop around you, but you had kind of this connection to source. You had this connection to God. Now, everyone obviously has a very different experience of what death is like. Some of us come very close to it. Some of us actually feel it. Um, it's really hard to objectify or standardize because, as I mentioned, everyone will have a different experience. And I too had a very close encounter with death when I was younger. I actually kind of mentioned it briefly on my website, but I think it sparked some interest into my own near-death experience. And so I thought I might spend some time on this video talking about that. It's a story that those close to me know very well. I've shared it before, but I haven't really shared it, to much of a great extent, I think, with the rest of you, with kind of the world at large, and perhaps there could be some value, and so that's why I felt like it could be a good opportunity to kind of share the experience. Now, for me, and I prefaced it with some of the more miraculous stories, if you will. Mine's was probably not as impressive, not as miraculous. Thankfully I did not go into a coma. My heart and body did not shut down. I didn't experience some of those things that you would probably associate with a near-death experience. But I probably got very close to it, and in those split seconds where I felt like I wasn't in this world anymore, that was enough of a spark, enough of a catalyst for me to begin the awakening journey I find myself on today, and that I've been traveling on now for the past 15 years. It all started back in high school, a time where I think many of us can agree is immense change, immense development, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Lots of different influences from our peers and friends, and I think ultimately an underlying desire to try to fit in, to try to be understood, to try to find our place in life. Natural things that we, of course, deal with as we grow older in our growing pain years. But for me, I felt like high school was a really challenging time, especially during the latter parts of it. No longer was kind of this innocent and carefree childhood anymore. Now it was a world of responsibility, a world of competition, a world of finding yourself, a world of knowing who you are and knowing your purpose. And, these can be very overwhelming for any teenager. So, who you see today is not who I always was, obviously, right? And so I experienced a lot of challenges, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I think I've shared before that there was a time where I didn't even believe that there was a God, or, if there was a God, that he wasn't actively involved in our life in any way. So, naturally, this concerned my parents, especially my mom, and you know, they tried, obviously to help, but I think I needed to kind of find my own way. And God always, in hindsight, God had his own plan for how I would discover him and come to him. So even though I was raised in a traditional Muslim background and in a Muslim household, and was taught kind of the basic tenets of the religion that many other Muslims were taught, I think it's my own sort of you know near experience with death that really opened my door and opened my eyes towards a deeper form of connecting with God. Um, Often I use the word spirituality, but I don't want to kind of get lost in sort of the labels of it, because at the end of the day, it's not religion, it's not spirituality, it is what cannot be named. It's something much deeper than that. It's feeling a sort of a deep connection with God. And I remember there was one day in when I was a senior, I had kind of had this habit of dropping off some of my friends after school, and we would always participate, some of which I wanted to do on my own to impress them and look cool. I think some of which they also encouraged as well, but not to assign any blame or anything. But I think we just were doing things that 17, 18-year-old boys were probably doing, which is, really reckless and stupid stuff. Many of the times we would do pretty, dangerous stunts, leaving out of the school parking lot and, driving recklessly on the road. And so one day it just happened that we were, doing another one of our antics, and I was driving in a residential area. Um, the speed limit was 35 miles per hour, so obviously not that fast, but I wanted to kind of show my friends that I was cool and I could do some cool stuff. I sped up, and I remember I was going 60, 70. I think at one point I even probably reached 80. And keep in mind, this is a residential area. It's very near to school. In fact, during that time that I was driving, there were students that were still walking home from school. So it's not like there was, the scene was clear, everything was fine. We were driving, and I remember there was a school bus in front of us, and it was sort of a one-way road. I wanted to get on the other side of the road so I can pass the school bus. And so I did that. And rather than immediately switching back into the right lane, I still kept going on the wrong lane where there was oncoming traffic. And then finally, I made the decision to get back into the lane, but at that point, the road wasn't straight anymore. The road curved. And so already going like 60, 70 miles per hour at that time, I didn't know what to do, right? If I kept going straight, I would have just jumped up on the sidewalk and probably hit a tree and probably could have killed myself and my friends in the car as well. So I immediately panicked, and I think my friends did as well too, but we were all in shock. And what did I do? I slammed on the brakes. I slammed on the brakes, and I don't know how I can describe this. There's moments where I try to go back and I try to remember and I try to piece together kind of this fuzzy experience of what happened. But in those few seconds, which felt like much longer than a few seconds, probably a few minutes, maybe even up to an hour, the car was just spinning in kind of free fall. It was just going in kind of a free motion, like unhinged, probably spun maybe 4 or 5 times without exaggeration. And during that time, I remember in that instant, that was the first time in my life where there wasn't a sense of I, where I felt completely disconnected from my body. And it's a moment that was very scary, obviously. There's no room for thought. There's no room for panic anymore, right? The panic happened before I pressed the brakes. This was a moment where everything just kind of like the whole room just grayed out, and I couldn't tell what happened. And I was almost kind of like in a trance-like state. And you're probably wondering, well, how does this happen in a few seconds? It's amazing, right? It's amazing how sometimes something can happen in just such a short amount of time. Now, of course, I mentioned earlier there are folks that have been in comas and have experienced, longer periods of being this close to death, but that was my own experience. And I don't know if it's up there with some of the other things that others have experienced, but in that moment, I felt like I was a breath away from death. And finally, that trance didn't last. Finally, I could just boom, I felt my whole body shake. The car had spun to the other side of the road, the wrong side of the road, completely got off the road. The back axle actually slammed above the sidewalk, and we were this close to hitting a tree. And so by the time that the accident was over and we stopped and we got out and we assessed the damage and made sure everyone was okay, luckily no one got hurt, not just inside the vehicle, but outside the vehicle as well. No one got hurt. But the back axle of the car was popped off. The back of the car was completely damaged. I had to call a tow truck. Feeling very sheepish and foolish at the time, I apologized profusely to my friends, but they weren't having it. They walked off. So I'm standing there, sitting there, all on my own. All these students are watching me. I'm calling my dad. I'm explaining the situation. And I remember him scolding me, not so much for the recklessness of the act, which of course he did scold me for that, but for the fact that I could have probably taken a life that day. And obviously, when you kind of go through that sort of experience, it changes you. And for me, that changed me a lot. It changed me. I didn't realize it at that time, but in the years since that have passed, and granted this is 15, 16 years ago, I've seen how profusely it's changed me and it's changed my perspective. Because I had this thing, sort of like an amulet. Um, you know, in Islam, obviously God is referred to in the word Allah. And we sometimes have like this amulet where you would hang in places that you want to be protected. You'd hang it above your doors, you'd hang it in your cars. And I remember my mom gave me this amulet a few months ago. And keep in mind, this is at the time where I wasn't the greatest, sort of religious follower. I wasn't the greatest believer of God, but she gave me this amulet to hang on my rearview mirror so that God would protect me. And I remember at the very first moment that the car crashed and I immediately came back into my body. I wasn't in this formless state anymore. I was back inside my body. I remember the very first thing I did was look up and I saw that the amulet was there. And it not only was there, it hadn't shooken at all. And this was the weird part. This was, for a car that just literally did 360 4 or 5 times. Everything's shaking. We're shaking. Our heads are bobbling around. You can only imagine us kind of rolling around the street. And that just happened to be fixed, even though it was hanging on a string. And in that moment, I just had kind of this innate experience that, there is something bigger here. God kept me alive for a reason. This thing actually works, right? This amulet actually works. Of course, it's not the amulet. The amulet is only a representation of God, of source, of consciousness, the universe. I mentioned Allah earlier, but I always say this in all my videos. It's not the name or the label that you should attach an importance to, but who all those labels are referring to. And that was really there's a few moments in my life that really changed me and shaped me. That is probably up there as probably the biggest moment, or one of the biggest moments for sure, that shaped me to who I am. That really began this journey of mine, and it wasn't smooth. I think I've covered this as well. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't something that all of a sudden I became spiritually awakened. Unfortunately, my story was not that clean, right? There was moments where after getting this, I was very inspired and I wanted to grow and awaken, but apparently my spirituality wasn't as deep enough at that time. And so inevitably I would be pulled back into the world, back into the materialistic things, back into the things that distract us from time to time. And it wasn't until we actually entered the COVID years that I started to see kind of this thing building. And it wasn't a phase anymore, Because one of the challenges that I used to have growing up was that I would always pick up everything, but I would always drop everything as well too. In fact, my cousins and my friends would always say, "Oh, this is just another phase that Najim is going through." Well, since then, it hasn't been a phase. Since then, this is where I've really seen kind of like a light switch, a totally different side of myself, a side that I'm enjoying more, a side that I'm, getting to become more comfortable with, because I'm starting to identify less and less with who this person really is. And just seeing the light behind it, seeing the essence behind it, seeing how ultimately it's just God and nothing else. So I hope the story I hope the story, brought something to you, and maybe just, turning it to now the broader picture, right? Just I don't like to talk about myself or put the spotlight on myself. I like to just kind of talk more broadly speaking. But since you guys asked, since there was a question or a request, I felt like I wanted to do this, and hopefully you found it helpful. Hopefully it was informative. Hopefully it may have been inspiring, because, one of the things that I learned from that experience, there's obviously many, but one of the things that I've learned was that to not waste a single moment of our lives. God, it may not be through an accident, right? We may not all go through an accident, but we all have the potential to die the next moment. We all have the potential to leave this world the next moment. Who knows? We might not even get to the end of this video. That's how precious life is. That's how short life is. And so it is God keeping us alive every single moment. And He's doing so for a reason, so that we actually go towards Him. And I'm so blessed, I'm so blessed that this happened earlier in my life and not later. I mean, I'm sure if it happened later, I'd still be thankful and I'd still awaken and grow as a person. But the fact that it was still in my earlier years has given me so much hope and encouragement, and sort of a positive outlook on life, that, what, we should cherish every day, cherish every moment, cherish every interaction with our family, with our friends, with our loved ones, cherish every challenge, cherish every struggle. It filled me with such a deep sense of gratitude, not only a love for God, but just a gratitude and a willingness to discover who it is that I am. In those few seconds that I wasn't this body anymore, then who was I? Right? Who was it? What was I? Who was I? And that's really, I know we all have our own sort of path to discovering God, and I'd certainly love to hear some of your stories or some of your experiences. Maybe you've experienced something similar, or maybe you've experienced something that has really just shifted your entire perspective on life. And, we all can have that. It doesn't have to be, as I mentioned, an accident, an illness, something tragic. It could also be something seemingly ordinary, right? Something seemingly, there's moments sometimes where like people can just be doing something totally just, every other day. But all of a sudden, that particular day, God wanted to give a message. God wanted to, give them something. And so I'll leave it at that. I don't want to, kind of belabor the story or the experience more than it needs to, but I hope it served a purpose. I hope it gave you guys a little bit of a window into my journey and how I came to where I am today. And of course, the journey is not done. It will never be done. There is always so much to learn, so much to grow. In fact, in many ways, I feel like I'm just starting. I'm just beginning to scratch the surface, and ironically, there's no end to this journey. But thankfully, who I am now versus who I was back then, it's night and day. And I'm so thankful that God, He's always been there, but I'm so thankful that I recognize that He's always been there. Something that I didn't appreciate and something that I took for granted during my younger years. Now I realize that He is the fundamental essence of everything. If you don't connect with God, if you don't see God as the core of your life, then it's not really life anymore. It's not really life. And I think that's ultimately what the accident and everything that led up after it helped me realize is that all there is God. And I know it's very scary sometimes to try to diminish ourselves and try to say that we are nothing or that God is everything and we are nothing. But if you really spend the time to go deeper and see yourself as that, then you'll see that you are actually a part of God and that you are not nothing. In fact, you are greater than nothing. You are greater than who you see in the mirror. You are the essence of God. You are the children of God. You are the light of God, the representative of God on this earth. And so when you've been entrusted such a beautiful role, such a beautiful position, why ignore that? Why throw that away? Why pretend that it doesn't exist? Discover it, go for it, as much as you can. And that's why I love, I think when I started my YouTube journey, I focused a lot on Sufi poetry and specifically Rumi poetry because I just loved how they expressed their love for God. It was something so deep and so passionate, right? It wasn't just like I'm going to pray to God because I want something or I want to I want salvation or I want the kingdom of heaven. It's no, I genuinely love God because I love God. In fact, there's this prayer or invocation by Attar, one of Rumi's teachers, where he even says, I love you, God, even if you burn me, even if you send me to hellfire, that wouldn't change anything. That is deep love. When you can love your Creator so much that you don't want anything out of it. That is deep and unconditional love. Of course, God won't just leave us out hanging, right? The more we go closer to Him, the more we feel at peace, the more we feel joyful, the more we feel, and that is our kingdom of heaven, right? Kingdom of heaven, and there's various beliefs, there's various, and this channel or this video is not meant to support or refute anyone's beliefs, right? Anyone has the right to believe that there is an afterlife or there is a reincarnation or there is a heaven and hell. I don't want to get into that topic as much because I feel like everyone is entitled to their own belief. But what I do believe is that there's also a kingdom of heaven here. There's also heaven and hell can be found here as well too. It doesn't just have to be after we die. So take it at that. I hope this sparked some curiosity or interest or some introspection, hopefully. But yeah, just let me know what your thoughts were. I hope you found the video helpful. It's a little bit different because I apologize if I talked a little bit too much about myself. But out of a request and trying to make sure that I give what you guys are looking for, I hope I was able to do that, and I hope that you found the video helpful to some degree. But with that, I will wish you guys a wonderful day and rest of the week ahead, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.